There's something universally mysterious about the moment of death. For centuries, people have asked the same questions. What happens when we die? Is there something beyond this life? Do we just fade into nothingness, or does something, a soul, a spirit, carry on? These questions echo through every culture, belief system, and family household. But for those who spend their lives at the bedsides of the dying, hospice nurses and end-of-life doctors, these questions aren't just philosophical. They're personal and often deeply spiritual. This video takes you deep into the real, often indescribable world of what some call spiritual portals, the space between life and whatever comes after. These aren't made-up tales. These are first-hand accounts from experienced hospice nurses and palliative care doctors who have witnessed the final moments of life hundreds, sometimes thousands of times. And they say the same thing. Something happens. Something that can't be explained by science alone. This isn't about religion or belief. It's about human experience. These are the voices of people who are trained to comfort, support, and care for those in their final moments. They don't speak in theories. They speak from experience, raw, unfiltered, and powerful. Here are 10 real-life stories from hospice professionals who have stood in the sacred space of someone's final breath. We'll listen as they describe what they saw, what they felt, and what they can't forget. Some of them were skeptics until they saw it with their own eyes. Others came in believing and walked away transformed. This video is meant to comfort you, to help you understand, and to open your heart to the possibility that love and life may not end when the body does. If you've ever lost someone and wondered if they were still with you, if you've ever felt a presence that couldn't be explained, or if you're just curious about what might happen at the edge of life, then this is a journey worth taking. So take a deep breath, get comfortable, and prepare to enter the space between worlds, the moment when the soul leaves the body. Story 1. Nurse Ana Delgado, the room that lit up. Ana Delgado never planned to become a hospice nurse. In fact, she entered nursing for the adrenaline of emergency medicine. But after a personal loss and a powerful moment with her dying grandmother, she changed paths. She's now spent more than 3 decades in palliative care, and in her words, has walked with more than 2,000 souls as they left this life. But one story haunts her in a beautiful way. It was the fall of 2009, Ana begins, sitting in a quiet room surrounded by soft daylight. I had a patient named Elsie, 87 years old. Fierce, funny, and stubborn. She used to be a piano teacher, and right up until her last week, she'd mimic playing in the air with her fingers. Elsie was dying from congestive heart failure. Her body was tired, but her spirit remained sharp. Her family visited often, and they'd often leave her room laughing despite the weight of it all. What made Elsie special, Ana says, was that she wasn't afraid to die. She used to say, "I'm ready to go, but not until I see the light you nurses keep talking about." We'd laugh because we didn't talk about any lights. But what happened the night she passed left Ana forever changed. It was around 3:10 in the morning, Ana recalls. The hallway was quiet. I was doing charting when I felt something shift, like a breeze had moved through me. I didn't hear a sound, but I felt it. I knew. I stood up and walked to her room without hesitation. When Ana opened the door, everything was still. Elsie was lying in her bed, breathing slowly. But the room felt different. The air had this warmth, not temperature-wise, but spiritually. There's no way to describe it fully unless you felt it. It's like love, memory, and something ancient all wrapped up together. Elsie's daughter was asleep on the couch. Ana sat beside the bed and held Elsie's hand. She took one last breath and then she smiled, Ana says, her voice trembling slightly. Not a reflex, a real smile. And then she was gone. But what happened next is what she calls her defining moment. I stood to adjust the blanket when the room suddenly lit up, not like a light bulb. It was like the light was coming from within the walls. It lasted only about 5 seconds, and then it was gone. At first, Ana thought she was hallucinating. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe the lighting flickered. But then Elsie's daughter stirred. "Did you see that?" she asked, sitting up quickly. Ana nodded. Neither of them said a word for a long time. Then the daughter whispered, "She found the light." They both cried. What changed in her? I've seen people go in many ways, Ana reflects. some peaceful, some struggling, some joyful. But when people pass, truly pass, there's always a moment of stillness, and sometimes there's more. Anna explains that she's witnessed other unexplained events since that night. Rooms that feel suddenly crowded with warmth, the scent of flowers where there are none. Patients who look toward a corner and say a name moments before they pass. There's more to life than this body, she says softly. I've felt it. I've seen it. You can't convince me otherwise. One of the things Anna says she's come to recognize is a pattern. It's not visible to the eye, but it's deeply felt by the soul. About 10 to 15 minutes before a peaceful death, the atmosphere in the room begins to change, she explains. Sometimes pets act differently. Cats curl up close, dogs start to whine, and the patient begins to speak to people no one else can see. She's had countless patients reach out and call out to deceased spouses, siblings, or even long-gone parents. One man, a retired military officer, sat upright just before dying and saluted, saying, "Yes, sir, I'm ready." I believe, Anna says, that we're welcomed. Not dragged, not judged, welcomed, like a homecoming. When asked why she continues to stay in such an emotionally demanding field, Anna answers without hesitation. Because it's sacred. People think birth is the only miracle, but I've seen just as much magic in death. It's the last goodbye, the final story, the moment when truth replaces ego. She says that when people are dying, they don't talk about money, possessions, or regrets. They talk about love. They ask about people. They say things like, "Did I matter?" Or, "Was I a good mother?" And I get to say, yes, you did matter. That's a privilege. Anna wants people who are grieving to know that their loved ones are not far away. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean they're not there, she says. Pay attention to the warmth in your room, the song that plays when you need it most, the dream that feels too real. That's not your imagination. That's connection. She also encourages people not to fear death. If you've ever been in the room when someone lets go peacefully, she says, you'd never fear it again. Story 2. Dr. Michael Shu, the man who saw his mother. Dr. Michael Shu is a palliative care physician based in Vancouver, Canada. With more than 15 years of experience walking patients through the final chapters of life, Dr. Shu has witnessed hundreds of deaths. He's known for his calm presence and ability to speak frankly about dying without stripping it of its dignity or mystery. But despite his medical background and deep understanding of the physical body, there was one moment, one patient, who forever changed the way he sees death. I used to be very clinical, Dr. Shu explains in an interview. For me, the end of life was a process. Organs slow down, consciousness fades, the body shuts off. That was it, or so I thought. The turning point came in the winter of 2017. Dr. Shu was assigned to a man named Martin, a 72-year-old jazz musician suffering from end-stage pancreatic cancer. Martin was known on the floor as cheerful, full of stories, and always asking nurses to sneak in his favorite record player. Despite his diagnosis, he joked often and kept morale high among patients and staff. But as the cancer progressed, his condition worsened rapidly. By early January, he was bedridden and drifting in and out of consciousness. Martin's family had flown in from all over, Dr. Shu recalls. You could feel how deeply he was loved. His daughter, Anna, stayed by his side day and night. It was during this time that something strange began happening. She's here. It started with Martin calling out to someone who wasn't there. He'd murmur things like, "Mom, you look beautiful," or "Wait for me at the door." The first time he said it, I assumed it was confusion, common in terminal agitation. But it kept happening, and what was more, he didn't seem distressed. He seemed comforted. The family told Dr. Shu that Martin's mother had died when he was just 14. They'd been very close, and he often said losing her changed the course of his life. The final night was unforgettable, Dr. Shu continues. It was around 2 a.m. I'd come in for a late check, and Anna was holding her father's hand. Martin's breathing had become shallow and spaced. His eyes opened suddenly, wide and clear, and he said, "There you are, Mama." What happened next, Dr. Shu admits, still gives him chills. He raised both arms slightly, like he was reaching up. His face lit up, not with pain or fear, but joy. A full smile. He didn't look weak in that moment. He looked like a boy again. And then, quietly, he took his last breath. The room was still. Anna wept softly, and Dr. Shu stood by in reverent silence. but just before leaving the room, he saw something he couldn't explain. As I turned to walk out, the air shifted. There was a sudden, overwhelming scent of lilies, fresh, bright, beautiful. But there were no flowers in the room. I checked, not a single one. He didn't say anything at the time, but when he returned to the nurse's station, he was quiet. I kept thinking about that smile, about how real his voice was when he said, "There you are, Mama. I've studied hallucinations, I understand dying brain chemistry. But this was something different." The experience didn't turn Dr. Shu into a spiritual guru or lead him to any one religion, but it opened him up to the idea that dying isn't just a medical event, it's a transition. If someone tells you they saw their mother waiting for them, maybe it's not just brain chemistry. Maybe it's reunion. Maybe the people we love do come to meet us. Since that night, Dr. Shu says he's paid closer attention to the emotional and spiritual cues at the end of life. He's heard more patients whisper names, seen more people reach upward. He doesn't always understand it, but he no longer tries to explain it away. I still provide morphine. I still monitor vitals, but I also listen more. I create silence. I stay longer in the room after someone has passed. Dr. Shu now includes spiritual support as a vital part of palliative care. He collaborates more with chaplains, grief counselors, and even holistic guides. Not because science has failed him, but because experience has shown him there's more to death than medicine. The body dies, yes, but something else. The person, the presence, the soul. It doesn't go the same way. You can feel it leave. Or in Martin's case, you could feel who came to get him. Story 3. Nurse Clarissa James. The room got brighter. Clarissa James is a seasoned hospice nurse from Savannah, Georgia. Over her 20-year career in end-of-life care, she's comforted hundreds of patients in their final moments. She doesn't consider herself religious, but she'll be the first to tell you. There is something profoundly spiritual about death. Her story centers around a woman named Mrs. Eliza Green, an 89-year-old matriarch, mother of 7, grandmother of 24, and a former choir director at her local Baptist church. She'd been battling congestive heart failure for years and finally chose hospice when treatments could no longer sustain her. Mrs. Green was one of those women you just don't forget, Clarissa says. Even in her final days, she was elegant, always asked to have her lipstick on, and she loved gospel music. We kept a little speaker at her bedside playing her favorite hymns. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when Clarissa began to notice a change in Mrs. Green's demeanor. She'd been mostly unresponsive the day before. But then she opened her eyes, clear and focused. She looked right at me and said, "I think the music is getting closer." I asked her what she meant, and she smiled real soft and whispered, "Can't you hear them singing?" Clarissa assumed at first it might be a dream state or the effect of low oxygen levels, but what followed made her rethink everything she thought she knew about death. They're all here. Around midnight, I stepped in to check her vitals, and her daughter was holding her hand. Mrs. Green was awake again, really awake. She looked around the room like she was seeing a crowd. She began calling out names. "Mama, oh Mama. Henry, is that you?" And then she said, "Don't crowd in so fast. Let me say goodbye to my babies first." She even chuckled. It wasn't confusion, it was clarity. She knew who was in that room. What shocked Clarissa most was the sudden change in atmosphere. I don't even know how to explain it. The room got warmer, not hot, just softer. And then I noticed the light. We had the same bedside lamp on, but it felt like the whole room was brighter. Not blinding, but glowing. Like a soft golden light, as if it was coming from the walls. Clarissa stepped into the hallway to check if maybe maintenance had adjusted the lights. Nothing. Everything was normal. I even rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was overtired. But her daughter saw it too. She said, "Mama looks like she's glowing." And she really did. Her skin had this light in it, like joy. At 2:17 a.m., Mrs. Green passed away, peacefully. No struggle, no pain, just a single deep breath, a small smile, and then she was gone. But the moment didn't end there. About 30 seconds after her last breath, we heard it, singing, not loud, not right in the room, more like in the air, or just outside, harmonies, layers. It was beautiful. Her daughter gasped and said, "That's Mama's choir." They listened in silence for a full minute. The sound faded. The room slowly returned to its normal tone. Clarissa checked for nearby radios or open windows. Nothing. There was no source for that sound. It wasn't in this world. Why it matters. Clarissa says she didn't talk about what she heard for years. I thought people would think I'd lost it, but when you sit with as many people as I have at the end of life, you start to see patterns. People call out to loved ones who've passed. They describe light, music, joy, and it's not random. It's consistent, even from those who never believed in an afterlife. She remembers one hospice colleague, a strict atheist, saying, death is supposed to be dark, but sometimes it feels like the opposite, like the beginning of something, not the end. For Clarissa, the moment with Mrs. Green confirmed that death isn't a void. It's a transition. One that often includes presence, peace, and yes, song. The gift of the job. People always say, oh, hospice must be such a sad job, and sure, it has heavy days, but I've seen more peace in a dying room than I have at some weddings. I've seen families mend, I've seen forgiveness, I've seen what I can only call a glimpse of the other side. Clarissa now makes it part of her practice to stay present after the last breath. I don't rush, I sit, I listen, because sometimes the most beautiful part of the whole journey happens just after the soul leaves. Story 4. Dr. Raj Mehta. He knew exactly when he'd go. Dr. Raj Mehta is a soft-spoken man in his late 50s, known among colleagues for his methodical approach and deep compassion. Based in Chicago, he's worked in both critical care and hospice units for more than 25 years. He's not someone prone to embellishment or fantasy. In fact, he prides himself on staying grounded, a man of science, logic, and protocol. So when he says one particular patient changed the way he sees life and death, people tend to listen. I wasn't raised to believe in anything mystical. No reincarnation, no spirits, no life after death. My training as a doctor reinforced that. I believed what I could measure, what I could see. But then came Mr. Walter Hensley. The man who knew Walter was a 71-year-old retired railroad engineer. He'd been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer that spread aggressively. By the time he came under Dr. Mehta's care, the prognosis was clear. Days, not weeks. But Walter wasn't afraid. He wasn't even sad. He had this calm, not the resigned kind, the knowing kind, Dr. Mehta recalls. He told me, flat out, "Doc, I'm leaving at 7:23 Thursday morning. Set your watch." I laughed it off. Thought maybe it was wishful thinking or denial. That conversation happened on a Monday. Dr. Mehta visited Walter every day, monitored his vitals, spoke with his daughter, who was staying at the hospice house around the clock. Despite the decline in Walter's physical condition, weaker limbs, reduced appetite, shallow breathing, his mind stayed incredibly sharp. He kept reminding us, 7:20 Thursday morning, that's when I'll be gone, I've seen it. I asked him what he meant, and he said something I'll never forget. They showed me. I don't know who they are, but I've seen the clock. I've heard the train. Dr. Mehta was used to patients experiencing dreams or visions near death. But the precision of Walter's claim was unsettling. He wasn't vague. He didn't say sometime Thursday. He said 7:23, with conviction, like someone giving you a train departure time. Thursday arrived. At 7:15 a.m., Walter was still breathing, though now unconscious. His daughter sat by his bedside, holding his hand. Dr. Mehta had just stepped into the room, more out of curiosity than medical need. I looked at the clock on the wall. It said 7:20. I remember thinking, all right, let's see what happens. Part of me still assumed he might linger longer, or that the time meant nothing. But at 7:23 a.m. exactly, something happened. It was like the room exhaled, Dr. Mehta says, his voice dropping low. Walter took one final long breath, then silence. No gasp, no struggle, just stillness. Dr. Mehta checked his pulse. There was none. Time of death, 7:23 a.m. sharp. I had chills. And for the first time in my career, I felt like I was in the presence of something much bigger than biology. But it wasn't just the timing that haunted him. It was what Walter's daughter said next. He always loved trains, she whispered. Used to say he'd ride one straight into heaven if he could. Then she added, he told me last night he heard the whistle. Dr. Mehta paused. There was no train near that facility. We were miles from the nearest track. A shift in perspective. That moment changed Dr. Mehta. I still practice medicine with all the tools I was trained to use. But I no longer believe death is just an ending. Walter taught me that it might be an arrival, a scheduled one. Since then, he's had several patients who seem to predict their moment. Not all as precisely, but enough to make him take notice. We ignore what we can't explain, but I've started listening more. To dreams, to symbols, to the silence before passing. There's often something there. He recalls another patient, a woman in her 90s, who said she saw her husband holding a clock and telling her soon. She died an hour later. People think death is chaos, but I found it to be more like music. There's a rhythm, sometimes even a harmony. Dr. Mehta now trains younger doctors to approach the dying process not just with medication and protocols, but with presence. It's not just about easing pain, it's about witnessing someone's journey. And when you're really present, sometimes you catch a glimpse of the mystery, like Walter's train, like the moment the air changed in that room. He smiles softly, the way someone does when they're remembering something sacred. I never believed in soul journeys before. Now, I'm not sure how I ever doubted them. Story 5. Nurse Maria Lopez, the mist that floated up. Maria Lopez has been a hospice nurse in San Antonio, Texas for over 18 years. Known for her calm presence and ability to comfort the most distressed patients, Maria is not someone who jumps to supernatural conclusions. But there's one story she shares, carefully, thoughtfully, that shook her to her core and forever changed how she views death. This wasn't just a feeling or a hunch, she begins. It was visible, tangible. I saw it, and so did 3 others in the room. The patient was a 91-year-old woman named Evelyn Carter. A retired music teacher, she was beloved by staff and family alike for her sharp wit and sweet singing voice. Though her body had grown frail, her mind remained clear. Maria cared for her during her final week of life. Evelyn was the kind of person who made you feel like you'd known her forever, Maria recalls. She wasn't afraid of dying, but she was very curious about it. She'd often ask me, "What do you think happens the moment I go?" I told her the truth. "I don't know, but I'll be here with you." In Evelyn's last 24 hours, she drifted in and out of consciousness. Her breathing slowed. Family surrounded her, reading psalms and playing soft music from her favorite records. But something unusual happened on her final evening. It started around 7:45 p.m., Maria explains. Her daughter noticed the air felt thick, like walking through fog. Not temperature-wise, but emotionally, like the room had become a different space. Maria and Aide, and Evelyn's daughter and grandson were present. We all felt it, the stillness. A strange quiet that settled over the room, even though there were no machines or beeping sounds to begin with, just silence. But it was a heavy silence, and then the mist appeared. Maria swears this moment is etched into her memory like no other. Evelyn took a long breath, not labored, just deep. Her lips parted slightly. Then, as the breath left her body, we saw a thin, pale mist rise up from her chest. It hovered about a foot above her, then slowly drifted upward toward the ceiling. The aide gasped and took a step back. Evelyn's daughter began to cry. It wasn't smoke. There was nothing burning. No medical equipment. No incense. Just this soft, glowing mist. It shimmered slightly, like a veil of steam that caught the light, even though there was no direct light source. It stayed visible for about 8 or 9 seconds, then disappeared. Everyone in the room saw it. We looked at each other. No one said anything for a long time. We were just stunned. Evelyn's grandson whispered, "Was that her?" And no one had the heart or the doubt to say otherwise. Maria immediately documented the time of death, 7:53 p.m. She then quietly spoke with her aide, a young woman named Lexi, who was just 3 months into the job. Lexi was pale, shaking a little. She said, "I thought I was going crazy, but you saw it too, didn't you?" I nodded. "Yes," and so did Evelyn's family. Later, the family told Maria they believed Evelyn's soul was showing them she had left gently, in peace, and with beauty. They were grateful, not frightened. It changed everything for them, Maria explains. Her grandson, who was an atheist, said that moment made him reconsider everything he thought he knew. In the days after, Maria spoke with her supervisor about what had happened. To her surprise, her supervisor didn't laugh or dismiss it. She told me, "You're not the first to see that. Some call it a soul mist. Others say it's the spirit leaving. It doesn't happen with every patient, but when it does, it's always at the same moment, that final breath." Maria began keeping a private journal of similar moments she witnessed. Over the years, she documented 7 additional cases where either she or others in the room saw something: mist, a spark of light, a shadow, or even the sense of a presence lifting. I can't explain it, but I've come to believe that the body is just a vessel, and when it's time, something does rise out of it, something real. Though Maria was raised Catholic, she says she never thought much about the afterlife until working in hospice. Now I think about it every day, not because I'm afraid, but because I'm curious. I've seen too much to write it off as coincidence. One thing she's sure of: death is not the end. It's a crossing, and sometimes if you're still and present, you can witness the crossing happen. It's beautiful, it's sacred, and it stays with you forever. Story 6. Dr. Helen Kwan, The Scent of Roses. Dr. Helen Kwan is a palliative care physician in a busy New York City hospital. Her expertise lies in end-of-life care, and she has been working with terminal patients for over 15 years. Throughout her career, she's encountered just about every possible scenario, from pain management struggles to moments of peace and death. But there's one particular experience that continues to resonate with her. This was in the early years of my practice, when I was still trying to reconcile my clinical knowledge with the many stories I was hearing from family members, Dr. Kwan reflects. But what happened that day? It was something no science textbook could ever explain. The patient in question was Dorothy Barnes, a 76-year-old woman who had been diagnosed with advanced ovarian cancer. She had been in hospice care for several weeks, and her condition had worsened significantly. Dorothy's family was supportive, but the emotional strain of watching her decline was evident. Dr. Kwan had been overseeing Dorothy's care for the past few days. Dorothy's daughter, Samantha, had been at her side constantly, along with Dorothy's son and her best friend. Although Dorothy was no longer fully conscious, her family was hopeful that her passing would be peaceful. Dorothy was what we'd call actively dying. Her breaths were becoming irregular, and we knew it wouldn't be long before she passed. Dr. Kwan says, but what happened in those final moments, it was something I'll never forget. The unexplainable scent. It was around 4:30 p.m. when Dr. Kwan entered the room for her usual checkup. The room was quiet, too quiet. Dorothy's breathing was labored, and her pulse was faint. I remember walking in and immediately noticing something odd. The room smelled different, not unpleasant, but unusual. Like fresh roses. Strong, yet delicate, like a garden in full bloom. The strange thing was, there were no flowers in the room. There wasn't a vase or any source of fragrance. The air was still, and the windows were closed. I thought maybe the scent had come from the hallway, or perhaps someone had brought flowers earlier and I hadn't noticed. But it was overpowering. It felt intentional, like the room itself had shifted. The moment Dorothy spoke. As Dr. Kwan observed Dorothy's condition, she noticed that the patient's eyelids fluttered open briefly. Her breathing paused. Then, to Dr. Kwan's amazement, Dorothy spoke, though her voice was weak and raspy. "I see them," she whispered. "They're waiting for me." Dr. Kwan leaned in, asking softly, "Who's waiting for you, Dorothy?" Her eyes were glazed over, but I could tell she wasn't speaking to me. She seemed to be looking at something beyond the room. It was as if she could see a group of people, or something else. She didn't say much more, but she smiled. It was the most peaceful expression I had seen on her face for weeks. At that moment, Dr. Kwan said she felt a chill sweep through the room. She was certain that something spiritual had just taken place, though she couldn't explain it. The family's reaction. As the family members entered the room a few minutes later, they too noticed the scent. Samantha asked, "Do you smell that?" She looked around, puzzled, and added, "It's so strong, like roses." Dr. Kwan recalls. Her brother even walked out into the hallway to check if someone had brought in flowers, but no one had. At this point, Dr. Kwan's skepticism was starting to melt away. There were no logical explanations. The scent of roses persisted for nearly 15 minutes before gradually dissipating. "I can't say for sure what it was," Dr. Kwan admits, "but what happened after, that's what really got me." At 5:15 p.m., Dorothy peacefully passed away. Her family, though devastated, was comforted by the idea that Dorothy was going to be with the people she loved, waiting for her on the other side. They later shared their belief that Dorothy had been given a sign of peace, something that gave them comfort in their grief. Dr. Kwan was struck by how calm and serene Dorothy appeared in the final moments, especially given the chaos of her decline over the previous days. There was no panic, no struggling. It was as if Dorothy had received confirmation that she wasn't alone in that moment. I spoke to her daughter afterward, and she said Mom always loved roses. She'd have a vase in every room. I think that was her sign. The smell, the people waiting for her. She was ready to go. What made this experience even more profound for Dr. Kwan was the recurring nature of similar reports she began hearing from her colleagues and patients' families. Many times, people nearing death spoke of loved ones who had passed before them, appearing in dreams, or sometimes in the room, as if to greet them. This isn't just one patient or one family's story, she says. I've heard similar things many times. There are patterns, and I don't think that's coincidence. The experience is consistent. People see or sense something just before they pass, as though they're being escorted or welcomed to the other side. Dr. Kwan's understanding of death and the spiritual experience surrounding it has evolved dramatically since that day. The scent of roses, combined with Dorothy's final words, left a lasting impression on her. I still don't know what it was, but I can no longer deny that something unexplainable happens when someone is nearing death. It's not just the body shutting down. Something, a consciousness, a soul, seems to be in transition. I've seen it too many times now. Her experiences have made her more open to the mysteries of life and death, and while she remains grounded in science, she says she has developed a deeper respect for the unknown. I've witnessed many people pass, and while we can manage pain and ease suffering, the final moment is something science can't fully explain. I think we have a lot to learn about the human spirit and its journey. Dr. Kwan believes that in some way, the body and soul are connected in a process that transcends the physical world. Whether through a scent, a vision, or a feeling of presence, she says it's clear that many people experience something profound just before they die. I'm not religious, and I can't say I have all the answers, but I'm more convinced than ever that the soul is real, and it continues after the body. That experience with Dorothy made me realize how little we truly understand about life, death, and what happens in between. Story 7. Dr. Jacob Willis, Flashbacks of a Past Life. Dr. Jacob Willis is a neurologist and palliative care specialist with more than 20 years of experience working in hospitals across the United States, specializing in brain function, memory, and the neurological aspects of end-of-life care. Dr. Willis has witnessed thousands of deaths, but one stands out more than any other. What he witnessed that day left him questioning everything he thought he knew about the mind and its connection to the body at the moment of death. I consider myself a scientist. I deal with facts and data, not stories. I had always been skeptical of those who spoke of near-death experiences or anything supernatural. But then I encountered Sarah. Sarah Lynch was a 59-year-old woman who had been diagnosed with advanced stage lung cancer. She had been in hospice care for several weeks, and her prognosis was grim. Sarah had been a lifelong smoker and had struggled with her health for many years. But what most people didn't know about Sarah was that she had lived an incredibly adventurous life, traveling the world, experiencing different cultures, and exploring places few people ever dared to visit. Despite her illness, Sarah had an infectious spirit. She was friendly, quick-witted, and extremely curious about the world. She was also very spiritual, though she didn't exactly follow any specific religious practice. She believed in energy, in the flow of life, and had always been fascinated by the idea of souls and reincarnation. She used to joke about what would happen after she died, Dr. Willis recalls. She would say, "I wonder if I'll come back as a bird or maybe a cat." But in her final days, Sarah became increasingly weak. Her breathing grew shallow, and her ability to communicate faded. Still, she clung to her sharp sense of humor, even in the face of her imminent death. On the afternoon of Sarah's passing, Dr. Willis was called to her room for a routine check. Her family was gathered around her bedside, and her daughter Emily was holding her hand. Sarah had been unresponsive for hours, and the family was preparing for her final moments. When I walked in, I saw her lying there. She was in that deep state of unconsciousness, but I could still see that her body was relaxed. There was an unusual calm in the room. Her daughter was holding her hand, and the whole family was sitting quietly, Dr. Willis recalls. But then something unexpected happened. As Dr. Willis examined Sarah, her body gave a small jerk. It wasn't the usual twitching associated with the dying process, but a distinct movement that seemed deliberate. Sarah's eyelids fluttered open, and then she began to speak. At first, I thought it was just a reflex or a random spasm, Dr. Willis explains, but then she spoke clearly, almost as if she were awake. Sarah looked directly at her daughter and said, "I'm going back. I see it. The mountains, the river. I was there, in another life." At first, no one knew what she meant. But as Sarah continued speaking, something astonishing occurred. She began to describe vivid scenes from her past. Scenes that didn't fit with her current life or anything she had ever mentioned before. She spoke about things that didn't make sense to us, Dr. Willis says. She mentioned traveling through a jungle, crossing a wide river on a wooden boat, and walking through ancient ruins. I couldn't place it at first, but then I realized these were details she had never shared with her family. As Sarah's speech continued, she described people she had never mentioned before. She named them with precision, even recalling conversations she had had with them in what appeared to be a completely different time and place. It was almost like watching a movie, Dr. Willis remembers. She described a man named Mikhail, a strong, muscular man who had been her companion in what sounded like a past life. She recalled his face with such clarity, she even remembered the sound of his voice. She spoke about working alongside him in a faraway place, building something together. It sounded like an entirely different world. The most striking part of Sarah's story was the way she spoke about her own death in this past life. She described a violent death, an accident at a construction site in what seemed like the early 1900s. She spoke of falling from a great height and being caught in a terrible storm that swept across the land. She said, "I remember falling. I couldn't see the ground, but it wasn't scary. It was peaceful, like I was being carried by something." As Dr. Willis listened to Sarah recount these vivid memories, he was stunned. Her recollections didn't match anything she had experienced in her current life. The images, the details, the language, it was all different, but it was so real, so clear, that it shook him to his core. As the minutes passed, Sarah continued to speak more about her past life. Her descriptions became more detailed. She mentioned specific locations, places that Dr. Willis later verified were historically significant areas, places that Sarah had never physically visited. She even mentioned a particular painting, a painting she described in vivid detail, right down to the exact color palette, which Dr. Willis later found in a private art collection. "I don't know how she knew those things," Dr. Bang Willis admits. "I was speechless, and so was her family, but they all believed her. It was like Sarah was in two places at once, her current body slowly fading away, and her soul traveling back to a past life." Then, as suddenly as it had begun, Sarah's eyes fluttered closed once again. Her breathing became labored, then stopped. The room fell silent. It was only moments later that Sarah passed away, but not without leaving behind an indelible impression on everyone who witnessed the event. Her daughter Emily was the first to speak, Dr. Willis recalls. She said, "Mom was telling us goodbye. She wasn't just dying, she was going home." For Dr. Willis, that moment marked a profound shift in his perspective on life, death, and the nature of consciousness. "I've always been a man of reason," Dr. Willis reflects. "I've spent my life studying the brain, understanding its functions. But what happened that day with Sarah? It changed everything. It wasn't just about neurons firing or chemical reactions in the brain. She had memories, clear, vivid memories, of a life that wasn't hers in this lifetime." How do you explain that? Willis, the experience with Sarah opened his eyes to the possibility that there is much more to life and death than what science can explain. He doesn't claim to have all the answers, but the encounter left him questioning the very nature of consciousness. Maybe there's something beyond the brain. Maybe the mind doesn't just die when the body does. I don't know. But Sarah's passing, it was something I will never forget. Since that day, Dr. Willis has become more open to the idea that the soul, or some form of consciousness, may transcend death. He doesn't claim to have fully embraced the concept of reincarnation, But he can't deny that Sarah's experience has deeply affected his worldview. I'm not religious, but I think it's possible that consciousness has a journey beyond the body. That moment with Sarah made me think that maybe the mind and spirit aren't confined to our physical form. Maybe there's something more, something greater, that we don't fully understand. Story 8. Nurse Linda Mason, visiting the spiritual realm. Nurse Linda Mason has worked in palliative care for over 15 years. She has seen countless patients pass away, many of them leaving behind loved ones, memories, and sometimes something far more profound, an experience that lingers in the hearts of those who witness it. Nurse Mason has worked with patients in hospice settings where, for the most part, the end of life is a calm and peaceful transition. However, one particular experience still sticks with her and changed her perception of what happens after we die. Linda was on the night shift when she encountered a patient named Henry Montgomery, a man in his early 70s with advanced heart failure. He had been struggling for weeks, and everyone knew that his time was drawing near. Henry, however, had never been one to shy away from talking about his death. He had always been curious about the afterlife and had often asked Linda about her views on life after death. Linda was initially cautious about discussing such topics, but Henry's openness made her feel comfortable sharing her own thoughts. I had no idea that Henry was about to give me an experience that would change my entire view of life and death, Nurse Mason recalls. Henry was a retired teacher who had spent most of his life in a small town. He was a man of faith, but had never been particularly religious. His belief in the afterlife was not tied to any specific doctrine, but rather it was based on his own personal experiences and reflections. In the weeks leading up to his death, Henry became more and more reflective. He often spoke of seeing strange lights at the edge of his vision and hearing whispers he couldn't quite understand. Initially, Nurse Mason thought it was just the result of his medication or the physical toll of his illness. But as time went on, these experiences became more vivid, and Henry's descriptions grew clearer. He would tell me that he could see people he had known in his past, people who had already passed away, Nurse Mason explains. At first, I thought he was simply hallucinating, but the more he spoke about it, the more convinced I became that there was something else going on. On the night that Henry passed, Nurse Mason was with him, monitoring his vitals as he lay in his bed, his breathing shallow. Henry had been unresponsive for several hours, and his family had gone home for the evening. The room was quiet, save for the soft beeping of the heart monitor and the low hum of the air conditioning unit. Then, something remarkable happened. Henry's eyes fluttered open. He looked around the room and his face broke into a gentle smile. Nurse Mason, who had been monitoring his condition, was immediately alert. She assumed that he was briefly regaining consciousness, but what he said next took her completely by surprise. "There's a light," Henry whispered, his voice faint but clear. "It's beautiful, Linda. I can see it. It's beyond the horizon, and it's warm. I've been waiting for this for so long." Nurse Mason's heart skipped a beat. She had seen many patients in their final moments, but she had never heard anything like this. Henry wasn't describing a typical near-death experience or the disorientation of coming to after being unconscious. He was speaking with clarity, as if he were looking at something beyond the physical world. It was as if he had found peace in that moment. "I could tell that he was no longer afraid," Nurse Mason recalls. "He had a sense of calmness that was so profound. He wasn't just talking about light in a metaphorical sense. He was describing it like a real place, a place he was ready to go to." Henry continued to speak, his words soft and slow. He described what he saw in incredible detail, a vast expanse of light that stretched across an infinite horizon, a place where time didn't exist and where he was reunited with loved ones who had passed before him. "I see my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I see my old dog, Buddy. He's waiting for me and he's happy. I've missed him so much. And there's someone else, a woman. I know her. I know her from before. She's calling me. She's telling me it's time." As Henry spoke, Nurse Mason felt a strange, inexplicable sensation. It was as if the room had changed. It was filled with an energy that she couldn't explain, an energy that felt both comforting and profound. For the first time in her career, she felt as though she were witnessing something sacred, something beyond the physical world. Within moments, Henry's breathing slowed even further. Nurse Mason was prepared for his passing, but the intensity of the experience caught her off guard. Henry's face softened, his expression peaceful. Then, without warning, he took one final breath, a deep, full breath, and his body relaxed completely. Nurse Mason immediately checked his pulse. It was gone. Henry Montgomery had passed away peacefully in his sleep, his soul seemingly transitioning into the light he had described moments before. It was as though the light had taken him, and he had been waiting for that moment his whole life. Nurse Mason reflects, "I had never witnessed anything like that before, and I haven't since." It was as if his soul had been ready to go, and when it did, it felt like he was embraced by something far beyond this world. For Nurse Mason, Henry's passing marked a significant shift in her understanding of death. She had spent years caring for the dying, but nothing could have prepared her for the profound beauty of that moment. The light Henry described, the sense of peace, the connection with loved ones, stayed with her long after his passing. "I had always thought of death as the end," Nurse Mason admits, "but after that experience, I began to wonder if it was just the beginning." Was Henry's passing a spiritual journey, one that transcended the limitations of our bodies? Was he really seeing something beyond this world? I'll never know for sure, but I can't deny the experience I witnessed that night. Nurse Mason has since spent time reading about near-death experiences and spiritual teachings, searching for a way to reconcile what she saw with her medical knowledge. She has become more open to the idea that there may be more to life and death than what science can currently explain. "I'm not saying that Henry was hallucinating or imagining things. What I saw that night was real," Nurse Mason says firmly. "He saw something, and it was something beautiful. I can't explain it, but I believe that what he saw was a glimpse into the next chapter of existence, a peaceful, welcoming place where souls go after they leave their bodies." While Nurse Mason remains a dedicated healthcare professional, she now holds a different perspective on death, one that goes beyond the physical realm. For her, the experience with Henry will remain a powerful reminder that death is not something to fear, but something that may be filled with light, love, and the reunion with those who came before us. Story 9. Nurse Maria Thompson, a peaceful transition. Nurse Maria Thompson has worked in hospice care for over 18 years. Throughout her extensive career, she has had countless opportunities to witness patients passing from this life to whatever comes next. Maria, like many in her field, is a realist, someone who approaches her work with a deep sense of compassion and professionalism, but also with a grounded belief in the importance of science and evidence. However, one night, one specific death, changed her perception of the spiritual side of life and death forever. Maria was working a night shift at a hospice facility when she was called to the room of a patient named George Harris, a man in his late 70s who had been battling terminal cancer for several months. George had been a pillar of strength for his family, a man who had fought fiercely against his illness. But as his condition worsened, the doctors and nurses knew that his days were numbered. Despite his failing health, George had remained surprisingly calm, never once showing fear about the inevitable. George had a certain serenity about him, Nurse Thompson recalls. He wasn't scared, he wasn't angry. He had come to terms with his situation long before it became clear that death was near. George Harris was a quiet man, someone who enjoyed the company of his family, but never sought attention for himself. He had always been a reserved person, someone who believed in the power of his own mind and spirit to carry him through difficult times. His cancer diagnosis had come as a shock, but George had never let it define him. His family spoke of him as a man of dignity, humor, and grace, and these qualities remained intact even in his final days. For weeks leading up to his passing, George had talked about feeling the presence of something, though he could never quite explain it. He often mentioned that he saw faces in his room, faces of people he had loved and lost throughout his life. The nurses attributed this to the medication he was on, but there was always something different in George's tone. It wasn't fear or confusion he was speaking with, it was a sense of recognition and peace. It was almost as if he was saying goodbye, Maria recalls. He would look over at the corner of the room and smile, as if he saw someone standing there waiting for him. At first, I thought he was imagining things, but as time went on, I began to wonder if he was seeing something I couldn't. As George's condition deteriorated further, Nurse Thompson was by his side, monitoring his vitals and ensuring that he was comfortable. George's breathing had become shallow, and the family was informed that the end was near. His wife, Anne, was at his bedside, holding his hand. George had always spoken lovingly of his wife, and in the final hours, his connection to her was palpable. It was one of the most tender moments I've ever witnessed, Maria says softly. Anne was holding his hand, and George was almost unresponsive, except for the occasional squeeze of her hand. It was as if he was trying to reassure her, telling her that everything would be okay. Around 3:30 a.m., George began to breathe more rapidly, the shallow breaths becoming more spaced out. Nurse Thompson checked his vitals, and the moment she saw the heart rate slow, she knew the time had come. But it wasn't just the medical signs that struck her. There was something in the air, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that Maria couldn't explain. I could feel it, like a weight had lifted, Nurse Thompson recalls. The room became so quiet, so still. It felt as though time itself had slowed down, and there was a sense of profound peace in the air. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. George's breathing ceased entirely. His body relaxed, and for a brief moment, the room seemed to glow. Not with light, but with a sense of warmth and serenity. Nurse Thompson immediately checked for a pulse, but George had passed. However, what she felt next was something she had never experienced before. As the finality of George's passing settled in, a wave of calm washed over the room. It was as if the air itself had become infused with love and compassion, as though his soul had moved on to a place of absolute peace. It wasn't just the medical sense of someone passing away that struck her. It was the feeling that George was no longer in the room physically, but that he had transcended to another realm. I've never experienced anything like it, Maria says, shaking her head. I know that sounds strange, but it was like his soul had moved on to somewhere beautiful. I couldn't explain it at the time, but I felt as though I was in the presence of something sacred. Before his passing, George had told his family and caregivers that he would be waiting for them on the other side. He had been insistent that death was not an end, but a new beginning. It wasn't that he was nonchalant about it. He simply believed that there was more to life than the physical body. When he was passing, there was this deep sense of love in the room, Maria explains. His wife was crying, but they were tears of peace. She wasn't scared for him. She knew that wherever he was going, he would be at peace, and she would be with him again someday. As George took his last breath, Nurse Thompson could feel the love and connection between him and his family. It wasn't just the physical departure that struck her. It was the way his soul seemed to gently leave the body and move on to a higher place. There was no fear in his passing, no struggle, only an undeniable sense of serenity. In the days following George's passing, Nurse Thompson found herself reflecting deeply on the experience. She had been witness to hundreds of deaths in her career, but none of them had left such a lasting impact. The sense of peace that surrounded George's passing stayed with her long after the shift ended. I didn't have the answers, Maria admits, but I knew what I had felt. I knew that there was something beyond the physical body, something more profound than we could understand with our current knowledge of the world. I didn't need to have all the answers. I just knew that George's soul had gone to a better place. Since then, Nurse Thompson has continued her work in hospice care with an open heart. She has become more open to the possibility of an afterlife, not because she has any concrete proof, but because of the peace she witnessed in George's final moments. I still don't have all the answers, but I do know that what I felt in that room was real. It wasn't just an emotional reaction or a figment of my imagination. It was something spiritual, something I can't explain but will always carry with me. For Nurse Thompson, George's passing reinforced an important lesson. Death is not something to be feared. It is, instead, a natural part of the journey. And while we may not have the answers to what happens after we die, The love and peace that can be experienced at the time of passing are just as real as the life we lead before it. What I witnessed with George was a transition, a peaceful journey from one state of being to another. It wasn't frightening, it wasn't traumatic, it was beautiful. Maria's experience with George Harris is a reminder that the moment of death, while sorrowful, can also be a profound spiritual experience. She believes that, like George, many of us may have a peaceful and comforting transition into the afterlife. A transition that is filled with love, warmth, and the promise of a reunion with those we've lost. 10. Dr. Charles Edwards, the doctor who witnessed the soul's departure in ICU. Dr. Charles Edwards has been a practicing physician in an intensive care unit, ICU, for over 25 years. He has witnessed death up close more times than he can count. Some peaceful, others tragic, and many often unexpected. As an ICU doctor, he is trained to save lives, to intervene in moments of crisis, and to offer hope even when the odds seem stacked against a patient. However, there was one patient, a young woman named Emily, whose death would forever change his perspective on life, death, and the soul's departure. Dr. Edwards had always considered himself a skeptic when it came to spiritual matters. He was grounded in science, in biology, in the medical processes of life and death. He believed that once the heart stopped beating, the brain ceased to function, and a person was gone. A simple biological fact. But that all changed during Emily's last moments. Emily Roberts was a 28-year-old woman who had been admitted to the ICU after a severe car accident. Her injuries were catastrophic, and despite the best efforts of the medical team, it was clear that she wasn't going to survive. Emily had sustained massive trauma to her internal organs, and her body was struggling to keep up. There was little hope for recovery, and Dr. Edwards and his team had discussed the situation with her family. They had decided to withdraw life support and allow Emily to pass peacefully. Emily's parents, along with her close friends, were at her bedside when the decision was made. It was an agonizing moment for them, but they were determined to honor Emily's wishes and to let her go with dignity. As a doctor, you always hope that you can save every patient, Dr. Edwards says, his voice tinged with emotion. But sometimes there comes a point where you realize the fight is over. It was one of those moments with Emily. We had done all we could, and we had to let her go. The final moments, a strange calm. As the family gathered around Emily's bed, Dr. Edwards carefully monitored her vitals. He could see that her breathing was becoming increasingly erratic and her heart rate was dropping. The decision had been made to disconnect the ventilator, and within moments, Emily's breathing became shallow and labored. There was no turning back now. But what Dr. Edwards noticed next was something that defied his understanding of the human body. As Emily's family held her hand and whispered their final goodbyes, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. The energy in the room, the tension, the sadness started to change. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. But then, as Emily's heart rate slowed further, a sense of profound calm enveloped the space. It wasn't like anything I had ever experienced before, Dr. Edwards recalls. It wasn't just the sadness of a family losing their daughter. There was something different, something peaceful. The whole room felt lighter, almost as if a weight had been lifted. As Emily's heart stopped, Dr. Edwards did what any doctor would do in that situation. He checked for a pulse and confirmed that she had passed away. But what happened next is something that Dr. Edwards will never forget. As Dr. Edwards stood there, preparing to pronounce Emily officially dead, something extraordinary occurred. He describes it as if time itself had paused, as if the very air around him shifted. He says he felt a subtle change, an almost imperceptible vibration in the room, as though something had left. I was standing at her bedside when I felt it. The air around us seemed to ripple. It wasn't just a sensation in my body. It was as if the entire room was aware of it, Dr. Edwards explains. And then it happened. I can't explain it in any scientific terms, but in that moment, I felt as if Emily's soul had moved on. He stood in awe as he witnessed something beyond the physical, beyond the medical science that had guided him throughout his career. There was no mistaking it. Emily was no longer there in the same way. It wasn't just the cessation of her body's functions. It was as if her essence, her spirit, had transitioned to another realm. It was an unexplainable moment, he says. I can't say it was a feeling of Emily leaving her body in the traditional sense, but it was as if her energy had shifted, as though she had been there with us, and then, in a heartbeat, she was gone. For Dr. Edwards, this was not a fleeting moment or an emotional response to a tragic situation. It was something physical and palpable. There was no doubt in his mind that something beyond the physical had occurred. He had witnessed death countless times before, but never had he felt this overwhelming sense of peace in the room. I have seen patients pass away. I've watched hearts stop and lungs cease to breathe, he says. But what I felt in that moment with Emily was different. It was calm, it was peaceful, it was as if she had reached a place where there was no more suffering, no more pain. Dr. Edwards acknowledges that his clinical background could not explain what happened in that moment. He had always believed that death was simply the end of life, the cessation of all biological functions. But the experience with Emily shattered that notion. There was something more, something he could not ignore or dismiss. In the days that followed Emily's passing, Dr. Edwards found himself reflecting deeply on the experience. He was a man of science, a professional who had always relied on evidence and data to guide his practice. But the sensation he had felt that night was not something that could be measured by instruments or recorded in a medical chart. It was something deeply personal, something spiritual. I couldn't just walk away from that experience and pretend it didn't happen, Dr. Edwards admits. I had to think about it. I had to reconcile what I had felt with what I had always believed. And in doing so, I realized that there is something more to this world than we can understand. Though Dr. Edwards still considers himself a man of science, the experience with Emily changed his perspective on life, death, and the soul. He no longer views death as simply an end, but as a transition, a movement from one form of existence to another. I can't explain what happened, but I know what I felt, he says with conviction. I felt a shift. I felt a peace. I felt that Emily's soul had moved on, and I believe that there is more to our existence than we can see with our eyes. Dr. Edwards now finds himself more open to the mysteries of life and death. He is not one to make bold claims about the afterlife, but he no longer dismisses the possibility of a spiritual existence beyond this world. For him, Emily's passing was a moment of personal transformation, a reminder that there is more to life than what we can observe and measure. I still have my medical training. I still approach my work with the same rigor and dedication, he says. But now, I also approach it with a sense of humility. I've seen things that I can't explain, and I no longer assume that I know everything about life and death. For Dr. Edwards, the moment Emily passed away was a turning point. It was a moment when he realized that the soul may very well exist beyond the body, and that death may not be as simple as science has taught him. What do you think happens after we die? Have you ever had an experience that made you question the nature of life and death? Maybe you felt a presence, or perhaps you've had an unexplained encounter with a loved one who has passed. Share your thoughts, experiences, and questions in the comments below. I'm reading all of your comments, and I truly want to know your perspective. Also, if you found this content insightful, please like this video to show your support, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our deep dives into the mysteries of life, death, and the afterlife. Sharing this video with others who might be curious about these spiritual experiences helps grow this incredible community, and your engagement helps us reach more people who are searching for answers. Let's continue this conversation and explore the unknown together. Thank you for being here and for being part of this journey.